I knew when my daughter and I built a custom guitar for her that this little amp wasn't going to cut it. So, enter the 57 Mini Tweed. After all, if we went through the process to build a custom guitar, it'd be a crime to not also build a vintage style tube amp to go with it. And even though it was a straightforward project, I made one mistake that had me stumped.
All right, you want to open that one up?
Yep.
Since this is my first foray into the world of amp building, I thought this little 5F1 amp would be the perfect starter project.
What's in there?
The speaker.
Huh?
You don't know what a speaker is?
I know what a speaker is, but I haven't seen one.
We're gonna take out these. What we need to do is we need to get this cable clamp mounted inside of the box. Do you want me to drill all the way through?
No.
Okay. I just thought I'd make sure. All right. Yep. I asked you to get the sticky notes, not because I needed to make myself a reminder, but to put under here.
Why?
So that way, while I'm soldering, if any solder spatters out there, that way it doesn't damage it.
Pretty smart.
Well, you know what? I saw that in one of the tips on the Stu Mac video.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, really. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit right there on the end. I'm gonna push back this wire just a little bit.
Can I?
Go ahead, there you go.
Like that?
Yep. What we're gonna do is loop these just a little bit. So that's nice and filled in, and we want it to be that way, so that way it doesn't rattle loose. That's now done, and now we're gonna work on the other side. Now we're gonna set up this little guy.
Sorry.
You turned this all around, didn't you?
Yeah.
So now what we're gonna do is grab this, pull this back until this wire sticks out the very tip. Now I'm gonna trim this wire so that they're the same length, and we're just gonna connect those. All right, that connection's on there. Now what we'll do is we wanna make sure that this is gonna fit. We don't wanna get ready to plug things up and it doesn't fit. This is now done, and we're ready to put this into the cabinet.
Okay.
There we go. All right, so go ahead and get those nuts started. All right, and then rather than using pliers, I've got a right size socket.
Why?
We have our label, and then we're gonna stick that here to the inside of the cabinet.
Okay.
Awesome. Grab that foil for us. Yep, and we should have 2 pieces, or we just have 1 piece that we'll cut. It's a good idea to put some staples here on the tape because this is just glued on.
Oh, really?
It's sticky on the back, but the inside of the amp is going to get hot and it can make that adhesive soft or even come off.
Oh.
So it's a good idea to staple it in place. Now, if we're building a period correct amp, let's use some vintage staples from 19 whenever.
How old are those
I have
things?
no idea how old these are, but check this out. It's a completely full box of staples. And it also helps if you put the staples facing the right direction. Do you want to try soldering?
Yeah.
While that cools, I'll get this one set up for you, okay?
Okay.
So, gonna bend over just a little bit. Right there. Bend over this side a little bit. So, here are the basics. This is hot. You want to keep it nice and clean. So you see how it's nice and shiny right now? That's what you're going for. We're gonna set this guy up in this holder to make life easier. So what you're gonna do is we're gonna put just a little bit of solder on the end of the iron, and that little bit of solder is gonna help the iron transfer heat to the terminal. You hold it about right there on the joint. And while you're holding it there with your other hand, you're gonna push that solder in while it's melting. Now, do you wanna just do this part first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So right here?
Yep. So hold it there on the metal. All right, go ahead and pick up the iron. Now set it right there on that side. There we go. All right, and lift up the iron. Now this one's a little bit more tricky. Put the iron, yep, very good. All right, and lift up the iron. That went great.
Really?
Yep. And I need a high five because that was awesome.
With the terminal strips prepped, the first component for us to mount in the chassis is the power transformer. I don't tighten this down all the way just yet, so that way we can get the terminal strips in place just a little bit more easily.
Alrighty, so yeah, just slide it right back there and then tighten that nut down.
it.
All right, now this one's gonna be kind of tricky.
I'll let you do it.
Okay.
Now, of course, the one of us with the tiny nimble fingers opts out of working in the tight spots and lets me fumble around for a few minutes to get this part in place. Oh well.
So we got those 2 grounding strips in place, and now we can move on.
It just so happens that the neck rest I use for guitar work is perfect for propping the other end of the chassis on to keep it level while I work. So at this point, I'm installing the main components of the amp into the chassis because once the eyelet board is added, things get kind of cramped and it would be a lot harder to get these pieces in place afterward. Like I mentioned earlier, this is my first amp build, and while I've done my fair share of soldering to wire up control panels and electric guitars, I'm no electronics mastermind. So while the idea of building an amp has always been intriguing, I've been reluctant to even try it because I assumed it would be too difficult to understand. And while I generally have an aversion to building from kits, because let's face it, half the time the instructions are horrible and you end up with something that was supposed to be exciting that just ends up turning into a huge headache.
You're killing me, Smalls!
A perfect example of this is when I was just about ready to burn my daughter's playset to the ground before it was even finished because the instructions were so bad. Not to mention, half the hardware was missing too. But that, my friend, is a story for another day, because today, I'm not tempted to give up. In fact, you could even say that I'm surprised, because truth be told, this kit was really well thought out. The instructions aren't only easy to follow and thorough, but everything was packed well, and all the small pieces like plugs, capacitors, and so on were organized so I didn't have to go hunting through various baggies or piles to find what I needed. Anyways, all that to say that if you're like I am, or was rather, and you want to build an amp but you're not quite sure if you can do it, this kit made the project really easy. Not to mention, you end up with an amp that's perfect for practice, but has also been used to record some iconic songs from guitarists like Joe Walsh and Eric Clapton. I'm not saying it's going to make you sound like them, but hey, we can dream, can't we? Anyways, at this point I have both of the transformers installed and the unneeded power leads have been insulated with a bit of heat shrink. I definitely don't want to have those live wires causing any fireworks inside the amp during a jam session. For the time being, I'm done with my chrome lunchbox and it's time to start on the eyelet board. To make things just a bit easier on myself, I popped the lid off of the organizer and used that as a tray to lay out the components I'll need for each page of instructions. This approach allowed me to cut all the wires I needed and also go ahead and grab all of those capacitors and resistors at once rather than after every single step. This may not be the way you want to tackle your build, but I found that it worked well for me. The type of wiring used in this amp is what's referred to as point-to-point. Before there were PCB boards, which is what's used in most modern amps, the options to wire an amp were either to run wires directly to every single component or go the point-to-point route, which in the most basic of explanations just uses a board of some kind to make the wiring a bit neater. Up to this point, I've simply been placing each of the components on the board. So before I go to town soldering everything in place, I take a couple minutes to review the schematic and make sure things are where they should be. Before this step is complete, I trim off the excess leads on the back side of the board and then bring my chrome lunchbox back over to the bench. To make sure the back side of the eyelet board doesn't short against the chassis, it sits on top of a fiber board to insulate it, and then both of these are held in place with a couple of screws. At this point, it's officially close quarters inside of there, and since I don't have a spy camera small enough so that you can see me solder everything up, we're just going to do one of those fancy snaps that seems to make magic happen. Ah, still got it. With the last bit of the wiring completed and just a few more steps to go, I'm feeling pretty good about my first amp build, but that's only because I haven't yet realized a mistake I made close to the beginning of this project. But since ignorance is bliss, my daughter joins me back in the shop on the assumption that we're close to hearing her amp for the first time. Before that can happen though, I need to test out the circuit with my multimeter and this funny looking thing called a snuffer stick. The initial power-up sequence has you turn the amp on and then plug in the power cord, because apparently if you mix up some of the wires, you could shock yourself if you did this in the reverse order. And that does not sound like my idea of a good time. As I go through the final steps checking various voltages with the multimeter and installing the tubes in a specific order, I use the snuffer stick each time I turn the amp off as a precautionary step to drain voltage out of the capacitors. This keeps me from getting shocked with over 400 volts in the event that I accidentally touch some of the leads with my hand. It's a good rule of thumb to only have one hand in the chassis while working with a live or recently powered up amp. To that end, I've been practicing my chopstick skills so that I can use the multimeter with a single hand more easily. And maybe after another 10,000 hours of training, I'll be able to catch a fly like the Karate Kid.
Hey, Mr. Miyagi, look. Look.
After running through all of the checks, each one of the voltages is to spec, so there's nothing left to do but close up the amp and plug it in.
Well, you ready to turn it on and see what it sounds like?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. All right, well, the light's on. I don't hear it. Go ahead and give it a strum and see what we... Yeah, no, I don't hear anything. Let's turn it off. And I'll take off this back cover and I'll make a couple more measurements. We'll see what we need to adjust.
While I was double checking things and trying to figure out what the issue might be, I remembered that my buddy Matt from Driftwood Guitars had recently built a tube amp, so I sent him a message to see if he could help me out. Matt told me to call his buddy David, who knows tube amps inside and out, and after only a 15-minute conversation, he figured out what the issue was, and it was painfully simple.
Oh, you know what? I bet that's where the problem is. Yeah, no, that's what I did. Thanks, man.
So, you see that right there? That's my problem. When I soldered the positive wire at the top of the jack, and not just the end of the jack, I shorted the positive and negative leads for the speaker, which is why there wasn't any sound. Thankfully, since this was simply shorting the circuit to ground, I wasn't at risk of damaging anything. So, note to future self, don't do this next time. But if you do, call David.
All right, I think everything should be working now. Fingers crossed. You want to give it another shot?
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
Now.
All right, light is on. All right, let's. Oh, all right. Nice. Should we play it a little bit?
Sure.
All right. Do you mind if I play it?
You can actually go first.
I can go first?
Yep.
All right. I think it sounds pretty good.